As a rule, nature wants to keep everything pure and crystal clear, just as it had originally come down in the beginning. Even the slightest coating wields its luster. This in itself, being a power, assumes a kind of life which we relate with our own karmas. So the slightest coating irukthula, the wheels, they acquire a life of its own and then assumes a kind of life which we relate with our own karmas. So that actually leads us to actually have more karmas. It is because we pose ourselves as the doers. This very thought forces its impressions. When such thoughts get accumulated, they form numerous coils. In other words, the wheels that are formed now are owned by the person as if they are the doers. When they acquire that ownership of those impressions, that impressions now accumulate together to form coils. The heat of the thought contained in it promotes the growth of activity, which sets up a sort of boiling action in it. So there is a thought associated with it because you have now associated the heat of ownership or the doership with that particular wheeling that has surrounded the soul. Now that particular thought gets heated up over a period of time and that creates a boiling action. Remember, one of the things that we do normally is that we go behind every thought that we get. Okay, that's exactly what we are trying to undo during meditation, unlearn during meditation, not to go behind every thought. So, when we are actually doing what we are doing in terms of going behind the thought all the time, that actually raises the heat in the impressions that we have formed around the soul and they start into go into a boiling action. According to the law of nature, everything that tends to go back to its source. So one of the laws of nature is that everything that has had has to go back to the source, which is why I was actually talking about the natural rule that anything that is started has to die one day. Anything that when there is a start, there is an end to it. It's a natural rule. So whether we feel good about it, bad about it, that's a different issue. But the point is that anything that is started also has an end to it. Since owing to the continuous contact of the heat, its heaviness grows unendurable. So we continuously pay that attention to these impressions to a certain extent by our whether with awareness or without awareness. But we continuously pay attention to it. When continuously an attention is paid to it, they actually start boiling up and the heat becomes unbearable. It becomes necessary for it to return to its origin in order to relieve itself of the weight. So now some of the things which are there in the subconscious mind, if you continuously pay attention to it, they start boiling up. They come to the surface to get released out of our system. Things coming out from even smaller things gets expanded when they find sufficient scope for it. In other words, when we pay attention to a particular samskara in the subconscious mind, they actually gets heated up. When they get heated up, they actually make space and they actually come to the surface. They make space for it to come to the surface. The expansion is full with force according to the volume it covers because the high things which have sprung up naturally possesses power. So the expansion is directly proportional to the power it contains. So the more the power it contains, the more the expansion. In other words, the more we pay attention to a particular issue, the more it hovers in the conscious mind and it kind of occupies the entire space of the conscious mind. You don't have anything now to actually think about except for this particular thing which is occupying the conscious mind. When this is the case, it now turns another phase and begins to cover all available space, affecting even the layers reserved for bhogam. This leads to the commencement of sufferings. So there is a layer which is reserved for bhogam. Bhogam is the karma phala or the effect of the samskaras of the past. So when this particular thing actually comes to the surface and it starts occupying the space which are reserved for the commencement of bhoga, the what do you say the layers reserved for bhoga, then it leads to the commencement of sufferings. So what was the reason for the coverings? So there is a particular thing which needs to come to the surface for it to come to bhoga. But that bhoga is experienced as suffering because of the way that we look at it. Otherwise, nature would normally clean it off. But since we have now paid lot of attention to it, it covers a larger surface than what you would otherwise normally cover. Does it make sense? So this is actually explaining how a particular set of samskaras come to bhoga. So if you go back to the previous paragraph, there are wheels around the soul. The wheels, the coverings are the samskaras. Now, when these coverings are there around the soul, that itself gets power and it develops a life of its own. Which is why, if you remember, one of the days I said in silence, in the context of silence, there are samskaras which are dashing against one another inside, and that also creates noise. If you remember one of the sessions that we had gone to, I think Hoskote, while coming back, we were talking about silence in the car. And that context I mentioned, the samskaras have a life of its own. They are actually dashing against one another. That also creates noise. Right? Now, how do the samskaras actually dash against one another? Only if they have got life. It has a life of its own. Okay? Like, for example, when a person starts drinking alcohol, they are in control of drinking. In other words, they are giving life to the activity of drinking. Now, as and when they continuously drink, over a period of time, the alcohol now acquires a new life. The alcohol starts controlling the life of the person. The alcohol dictates what should happen to the life of this particular person. Can you see? So, in other words, the alcohol, which was a lifeless thing, now has acquired a life of its own because of the continuous attention paid by the person. There again, a very fundamental principle of nature, we give life to things. And that's something that we need to remember. And that's exactly what we do when we bring idols for worship during Ganesha festival. We do prana pratishta of the Ganpati idol. So one of the first things that we do after we bring the idol for festival is that we start the puja, and the first part of the puja is prana pratishta. And in prana pratishtapane, what we do is we hold the idol with our hand. And we impart a mantra saying that whatever my life is, let my life be transfused or infused into this idol. That is what you do. Okay. In other words, you are infusing your life force into the idol. Now see the fallacy of it. You infuse your own life force into the idol and then stand in front of the idol and pray for it. I want this, I want that. Now, if somebody were to look at it, they'll just laugh at the foolishness. What are you doing? This is like some preceptor putting a photo of the Babuji in front of him and saying that now you sit in front of the photo and meditate. While Babuji had given a connection to this preceptor to do his work on his behalf. Then Babaji laughed and said, this fellow has more belief in the photo transmitting than himself transmitting. This is exactly how people think in all, what you say, topsy-turvy way. That is exactly what we do in all vratas. We impart our own life force into the idol and then we then stand in front of it asking for boons. The question comes, if you are going to do that, why don't you ask boon of yourself? The reason why you don't ask boon of yourself is the ego is covering the soul. So you don't have confidence in your own life force. The ego covers it. So the ego actually makes you lose wisdom. So when the light of the wisdom shines, then you actually start questioning, what are we doing? Why are we doing this the way that we are doing? How is it working? All these questions come when the wisdom turns on, when Viveka dawns. You got the point? Now, many of the youngsters don't do things which are told to them by their parents. for the simple reason that they want clarity on their own. They want to develop that clarity. And once they develop clarity on their own, they're happy to do it, not otherwise. So, in other words, we actually tend to depend on clarity before we want to do something. So, clarity comes at the fifth point, and wisdom, divine wisdom, starts coming at the 10th point. So, clarity is one thing, wisdom is another thing. Clarity is regarding clarity about how things are in life, the way that they are. That is about clarity. Because up to fifth point, your mind is covered with so much of samskaras. You are engrossed with so much of the samskaras that you don't get an accurate view of how things are in life. So at the fifth point, when some of the samskaras are actually removed, you get a better view of life. In other words, you develop some amount of clarity about life. Okay. As you go further, when you have now at the Pind Pradesh, you are only tasted the individual aspect of life. And as you move from the sixth point up to the 10th point, you now also taste a universal aspect of life. So when the clarity now is amalgamated with the universal aspect of life, then wisdom dawns. You are touching the realm of the divine. Then wisdom comes. So when clarity is only at the level of individual, we are still in the Pinda Pradesh because there are a lot of samskaras in the Pinda Pradesh and we have a lot of filters through which we look at life. When most of the filters are taken away and we have actually tasted the universal aspect of our existence to a certain extent, then the divine wisdom starts flowing into us. So there are two things. One is clarity, other one is wisdom. And there is a word that we use, intuition. Intuition covers all these things. Intuition covers inspiration, intuition covers clarity, intuition covers wisdom. Intuition as a word covers quite a what is a broad spectrum that includes all these things. But a lot of people use the word intuition for most of these things. Nothing wrong with that, but that's to be kept in mind. Because intuition as a word is not very specific to one thing. There are a lot of things that are covered in intuition. The lowest level of intuition is something related to inspiration. Then you have clarity, which is also part of intuition. Then as you grow further, you develop divine knowledge and then divine wisdom. They're all part of the intuition only. Okay. So to just kind of very simplify, to just play around with words, if you want to kind of do it, intuition means in plus tuition, right? It's almost like you are in directly tuition with God. That is intuition. God is directly teaching you. That is intuition. You are not teaching yourself. Somebody else is teaching you. And who is the one who is teaching you? God is teaching you. That's all. The more closer you go to God, the more you get intuition. In other words, rather than being intuition on and off, you are intuition all the time. Does it make sense? So it becomes so easy to understand all these things. We were just playing around again with the words intention and attention. Okay. So intention is in plus tension. So the self is in tension. Okay. Now it wants to get rid of the tension. Then it actually starts doing attention. It is at attention with something. It holds on to something. So it pays attention to an object. Why? It pays attention to an object because it is in tension. If the self is not in any tension, why will actually it pay attention to anything? Only when you are in tension, you will actually pay an object at tension. In other words, that object becomes the point of your attention. In other words, your tension now stabilizes on that particular object, and you use that object to relieve this tension that you are carrying. I'm not sure whether it makes sense. You are in intention, means intention. The word itself is a combination of two. Now you might say that that spelling is different, Intention rather than Intension. But it hardly matters. But what we do, I'm telling, when we have any intention to do something, we start paying attention to it. Without intention, you don't pay attention. There is some intention behind any activity that you do, right? So why are you doing any activity? To relieve the tension in the intention. Once the tension is relieved, then automatically you are at rest. At that time, you are relieved of your intention. Does it make sense? Normally, we don't look at these things in this particular perspective. But the very words that we use actually indicate their own meaning and in terms of their role in life. Any activity is backed by an intention. What happens when you do any activity? You are relieved of the tension. That's all it is. How are you relieved of the tension? By attention. Now you cannot do any activity without attention. You have to pay attention to it. So attention then becomes a mode of relieving the tension. So when the attention relieves the tension, there is no intention, and then when there is no intention, there is no attention also, no need for attention. Because you are resting in yourself. That's why. Aram se. Till the next intention comes. Right? So it's a cycle. You go on doing this. You go into attention, you start with intuition, go into attention, and from then you do a certain activity. Then the intention is actually fulfilled. So we are no longer in tension. So then the intuition is now gone and you are at rest. So this is a cycle that we follow all the time. Okay. So similarly, intuition. I don't think many people would have thought about intuition as being intuition with God. But the word itself carries those two words together. Anyway, so let's continue. So what happens is when, like I just gave an example of the alcohol, the samskaras acquire a life of its own. How do they acquire life of its own? It cannot get life by itself. Only when we pay attention, it gets life. So if a person does not drink alcohol regularly, the alcohol will not predominate their life. It does not acquire a life of its own. But when they do it regularly, what happens is we are infusing the life force every time we are doing the activity. Then it acquires a power. And that power, now what happens is that it starts, because it's now associated with the thought power, attentional power, and then there is a thought also associated with it, it starts boiling. When it boils, it actually starts expanding. When it starts expanding, gradually it starts coming up to the surface. When it comes to the surface, it now occupies the conscious mind. And there is a field of bhoga there. Now, once that conscious mind, the field of bhoga is also covered by this, you are now, what you say, preoccupied by this particular thing. And that is when you feel that you are actually preoccupied by this thing, that you are not able to lead life in the way that you want because you are preoccupied by this particular thing at the conscious mind. Your conscious mind activity is now impacted. That is when you experience suffering. As long as the conscious mind activity is not impacted, you don't experience suffering. It's almost like the virus multiplying and coming to such a way that even one simple instruction slows down the computer. You give one instruction and it takes 15 minutes to work on it. How will you feel? You'll feel so frustrated, right? That's exactly what happens when the life force is interfered with a particular samskara, which is now occupying the field of the bhoga. So now you feel totally frustrated. You feel that you are suffering. So you feel suffering while you use that computer. Exactly the same suffering you will feel while leading life. So I'm just giving you a very simple example that many people have actually experienced. Right. And then the person who repaired the computer also told me, now just see how the computer is, if it works immediately, compared to the time when it takes 15 minutes for one instruction to unfold. Now just look at the quality of life. So when the computer works immediately, you feel that life is moving smoothly. In other words, you have the freedom to do what you want. You want to browse, you can do. You want to read something, you can do. You want to look for some news, you can do. You can do anything. But when the computer is taking one instruction to be processed in 10-15 minutes, then there is nothing that virtually you can do. So then you feel you lose that freedom of doing. Now, this ability to do certain things with freedom, when it is lost, you feel that as suffering. As long as you retain the freedom to do the things that you want, you don't consider as suffering. You say this is also going on, but I'm not worried about it. Does it make sense? So, suffering is when the working of the conscious mind is impacted. Now, why do people come for treatment? People come for treatment when they start perceiving that they are suffering. And when do they perceive suffering? Not when it is kind of in the subconscious mind, which they are not aware of. When this grows in the subconscious mind and starts occupying the conscious mind, then they start feeling that they are not able to do their normal activity that they want to do. They lose that freedom. Then they perceive that there is suffering, and then they come to the doctor to relieve the suffering. Okay. So, in this context, the suffering is very simple. Suffering is nothing but losing the freedom to do what you want to do at any particular time. That is suffering. As long as you have that freedom, even if you are bombarded with 100 issues, as long as you have that freedom, you are not worried about it. You are okay. You can manage it. So, this is very, very important to remember. Why suffering? There are a lot of people who have a lot of variations, sugar variations in BP, but they are least bothered about it. But the moment it actually has an impact on the body or the mind, they actually come to the doctor. Many kidney patients come to the doctor because they start developing vomiting. They cannot actually eat anything. They start developing swelling of the feet. Now they don't know why they are developing all these things. Now there is suffering. When the suffering comes, they come to the doctor. Till that time, say 1 or 2 years back, they would have shown to the doctor and the doctor would have told you have BP. So please take the medication. So they would not bother taking the medication, nor they would go back to the doctor. Now the question comes, why did they not take the medication, nor actually go to the doctor again for follow-up? The reason is there was no suffering. It did not restrict their freedom to do what they want to do in life. So they did not take it seriously. Now, that thing which they did not take seriously grew at the subconscious level without awareness. Then it breaks open into the conscious level. It could be at the conscious mind level or at the body level. Then you can no longer neglect it. If you're vomiting, how can you neglect vomiting? Now it's broken open into your conscious mind. You are feeling that. When it breaks open into the body, your the feet are swollen. How can you neglect it? Now you are not feeling hungry. Everybody else in the house is eating very well. And now mangoes is and everyone is eating mangoes. You can't eat mangoes. Now you are worried. Oh, something is wrong. Now let me go to the doctor. That's when they come to the doctor. By that time, the complications relating to the high BP would have already taken hold of the body. Now this would have occurred at the subconscious level. So when they come to the doctor, they now take stock of what is the damage that the body has suffered because of neglecting certain things. So you basically take stock of it. If you are lucky, the body might not have suffered too much. You might be able to reverse many of the things. But if you are unlucky, you might not be able to reverse the thing. So many people go into kidney failure, which is not reversible. So once the kidney goes into failure, then the only option is transplant. Many people end up in transplant for unnecessary reason, for not experiencing the suffering. No, in other words, if the nature gives suffering, you would have come to the doctor early, right? So now you tell me, suffering is a blessing or a curse? If you look at it this way, you can recognize that suffering is a blessing. It makes you take stock of the situation and seek help early. Got the point? So there are so many things that have actually we have discussed today. What is the meaning of suffering? When do people actually feel suffering? And what exactly they do after they actually start getting the feeling of suffering? Only when the people start feeling that they are suffering, they seek help, not otherwise. Okay. So I have taken up the subject very briefly, though every point in it could be further illustrated separately. I've given few examples for you to kind of easily relate to some of these things. The circumstances for the purpose of bhogam, process of bhogam, which may be from internal causes or external causes, are thus created. So when the boiling action is set forth, then something else in the environment acts as a trigger for it to be let out. So bhogam is the process where the suffering comes to the surface and you now take action to relieve the suffering. Okay. So suppose there is a pain and there is an abscess that is developing. You are not worried about it. It's paining, but you are able to tolerate it. So you don't do anything about it. Suppose it grows and grows. One day, either it punctures itself or it becomes so painful that you go to the doctor. And what did the doctor do? The doctor punctures it. When the pus-filled cavity, which is the abscess, is punctured, it is relieved of the pressure. What happens to the body? The body goes back to its original nature. Body never carried the abscess. That's not its original nature. When you puncture the abscess and relieve all the pus from the abscess, you go back to its original nature. The suffering comes down. Now, this process where you actually prick the abscess and relieve the body of the suffering is the bhoga. So once the pus is relieved from the body goes back to its natural state. Likewise, once a particular samskara comes to the bhoga and it is now thrown out of the system because of the bhoga, the system, the soul goes back to its original pure condition, purer state. That's all that happens. Does it make sense? So Priya was eating for more than 10 minutes. Now, I don't know whether to call it as suffering or bhoga. Now you need to work out what is it, whether it's a suffering or a bhoga. Because post that death, she is back here now. Bhoga is something that comes to the surface, and through the suffering, the bhoga helps you to relieve the suffering. Bhoga is that thing which actually relieves you of the suffering. The suffering is because of the samskara. Bhoga clears of that suffering, though you are going back to your original state. That is the sequence. Samskara gives rise to suffering. Then suffering is relieved by the bhoga. After the bhoga of the samskara or the suffering because of the samskara, then you have thrown out that samskara along with the suffering. Then you go back to your original state of purity. That's all that happens. This is the sequence. So samskara leads to suffering. Suffering in turn leads to bhoga. Bhoga relieves you of the samskara and the sufferings. You go back to your original state. So bhoga is actually very helpful for you all the time. And that is the job of nature. To bring samskaras to bhoga is the job of nature. Okay. If you do not do anything to an abscess that is developed, nature itself brings it to bhoga. At some point of time when you are sleeping, it ruptures. You don't even know that it's ruptured. Either you actually relieve the abscess by pricking it and then getting it clean by the doctor, or nature itself actually tries to throw it out of the body. That's exactly what happens when we actually take a coin. Suppose when we are young, many children end up taking some coins, right? So the coin, when once it is taken, now you have suffering, right? Once it is suffering, there is suffering. The nature starts actually making more intestinal movement. Why does the nature make more intestinal movement? There is suffering. Now nature wants you to get rid of the suffering. So it creates the bhoga of intestinal movements. Then the coin is thrown out of the system. Once the coin is thrown out of the system, neither the increased intestinal movement remains, nor the suffering because of the coin remains. Both are gone. Now, next time you would have learned from your experience not to accidentally take in the coin. Got the point? So, Priya sister would have got the lesson that not to eat more than 10 minutes. Now, Gopal Krishna is thinking about what would be the suffering and the bhoga by eating more than 10 minutes. Okay, you want to ask something?
Uh, just had one question. So it was written that when a samskara is given like a lot of attention and it becomes energy heavy, it goes down into subconscious.
Correct.
But at what time does it decide to come up? Like, how is that decided? And
That is
why does it
decided
come up?
by the energy that is drawn from the subconscious.
Is there like a tripping level? Like until then it goes down and then after that it comes up, like something
No,
like that?
see,
Or
the subconscious has a base. It can go down only up to the base. Beyond that, it cannot go. So it settles down in the bottom. So if you throw some stone into the lake, what happens? It goes up to the bottom. It cannot go beyond the bottom. It goes and develops a stay. Now, if something of a movement starts developing, unlike a stone which goes to the bottom of a lake, here it's a living system. So the samskaras, by paying attention, go down to the bottom of the subconscious and settle there. But the thing is, these samskaras do not actually stay there lifeless. The subconscious mind is full of life. The energy from the consciousness is continuously flowing to the subconscious. So whatever in the subconscious is there, it gets a life. So everything that goes to the base of the subconscious draws life force from the consciousness. It happens automatically. Now this is exactly the same model that we use for constant remembrance. It's the same model. But the difference is here this is a samskara, there it's a constant remembrance, the thought of the divine. That's all the difference. The effect will be different because the thought itself is different. The underlying basis is different, but the process that we use is the same. Like, for example, we can utilize intelligence for the sake of getting more entangled in Maya. We can also utilize intelligence for getting unentangled from Maya. Intelligence is the same, but in what direction you use it is what is going to matter. So this process of drawing the energy from the subconscious is the same for everyone. Now, what is it that you allow to draw the energy is what is going to be different. When you are utilizing the same process apparatus or the process for your journey, you call it as constant remembrance. When you utilize it for other thought processes, it now becomes a constant suffering. That's all. So rather than constant remembrance, it becomes constant suffering. So there are people who continuously suffer for years together because they knowingly or unknowingly paying that energy to these samskaras which are deposited at the bottom of the mind. the subconscious mind. Does it make sense? So the nature's job is to bring it to the surface. See, you have put it in the subconscious and you don't know that it is there, right? Then how to get rid of it? So what does nature do? It actually brings that the meditation that you do again creates a boiling action. So it discharges the samskaras from the base of the subconscious and brings to the surface. That's why you get more thoughts in the meditation. They come up to the surface. Likewise, the prayer that you do brings up some of the samskaras to the surface. So when it is brought up to the surface, your conscious mind is now preoccupied by it, and that is suffering. Then when you have suffering, you feel like going and taking a sitting to get it cleaned off, so that the suffering comes down. Can you see that? So this is the sequence. So there is this whole process. So initially, when we pay attention, as you say, the samskaras get heavy and go down to the surface, to the bottom of the subconscious. From the conscious mind, it goes down to the subconscious and gradually it settles down. But after that, it goes out of your awareness. When it's out of your awareness, you don't now pay attention and put in energy. It automatically draws energy from the consciousness, the subconscious level. Because the energy is always flowing in the consciousness. It's very simple. If you put a seed into the ground, initially you have to water it regularly till the seed gradually grows into a plant, seedling and then a plant. And the plant starts growing the roots into the ground. Now, when the plant has sufficiently grown roots into the ground, it starts drawing the nutrients from the ground itself. Now, it is immaterial whether you actually water the plant or not. It is anyway drawing energy from the earth itself. It grows. So remember, the subconscious mind is the most fertile ground that we have got. Whatever you put there, it grows. That's all that we do. So we need to be careful what we put into the subconscious mind. Does it make sense? And I'll also give you one caveat. As you grow spiritually, you make the subconscious mind even more fertile. So if you put even one wrong thing, that grows very fast. That is one of the risks that you carry. So as you grow spiritually, if you have one negative thought, it can just balloon up because you have increased the fertility of the subconscious mind. So just you have to be very careful. As you grow spiritually, you have to become more and more careful. You cannot allow negative thoughts to, what you said, descend and settle in the heart. Because your heart is now so fertile. If you put one thought, it just grows like a bush. Does it make sense? So you have to be careful. Now, I thought we'll finish seventh maxim, but looks like we have given a life of its own to our talk only. Now, this is also a new samskar. Okay. So another meeting, I think in another 3 4 minutes is starting. So I probably have to go there. I thought I'll just read this off so that we can. There's only two paragraphs. We'll just finish it off. The circumstances for the process of bhogam, which may be from internal cause or internal causes, created. The external help comes in the form of suffering caused by the wrongs done by others, against which the people generally poison their thoughts on account of their own ignorance. So without this samskara being present, we start blaming other people that having created the suffering. The root of the suffering is within us only. The other people is just a nominal cause. Okay. This is very improper because this action, having helped the process of purification, has in fact put you under a lot of obligation, sense of obligation. If they had not created that circumstance for the samskara to come to the bhoga, you would be suffering now. So now that they have actually created the field for bhoga, you should actually be thankful to them rather than blame them. Right? So Gopal Krishna will say, so next time when I come late to the meeting, you should be thankful to me. When this is the case, the work done through the external agency, it may be any, has in other words, rendered the function of a true friend. Now he'll pull up the collar, true friend. Luckily, his t-shirt does not have a collar, neither Priya's. Otherwise, she would say, my eating for a longer time is also the reason for your bhoga. This may seem to be an uncommon approach since this basic philosophy was never taken into account before for the reason that it came out simply in the form of an advice to take everything as coming down from the Lord so that the feeling of resentment may not arise and one may not lose nobility of character. So earlier people were not looking at how does the actually bhoga come into effect. They were not looking at it at all. So this is the philosophy that has been now elaborated. Otherwise, people were told, don't worry about it. Think that whatever suffering you get, it's coming from God. Don't worry about it. So that was the thing, a simple advice given. But Babuji has given the philosophy behind it, behind that simple advice, that everything comes from God, accept it as such. So thus it is now quite evident that anything that comes to us for our ultimate good, may it be from any medium, fills our heart with delight and promotes in us a sense of gratitude. Again, this fills the heart with gratitude. So again, maximum 7 is also something related to gratitude. Like we spoke about, maximum 5 and 7 both are related to gratitude. Although we feel that some people have done wrong to us, if you look at it in the right perspective, from the spiritual perspective, you can actually look at it as a means of learning. Any difficult situation that you face is an opportunity for you to learn. So why not be grateful to the person who actually created that opportunity? Okay. So now, so I need to be grateful to both of you for having come late. And then thank you for both of you. That's what this maxim is about. Is that okay?